What happens when one of Hollywood's last most legendary icons walks into a morning show expecting soft questions, only to find himself ambushed by a very different agenda? You're about to find out. And trust me, this wasn't in the script. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, because this is one morning show moment no one will forget. It was meant to be simple, a quick interview, a bit of promotion for a new film. In and out at 94, Clint Eastwood didn't do much TV anymore. So when Good Morning America announced he'd be appearing live, network executives were over the moon. The producers had even cut together a nostalgic tribute clips of Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, Gran Torino, the works. George Stephanopoulos was given clear notes. Stick to the film. Talk about Clint's legendary career. Maybe touch on his directing process. That was it. When Eastwood stepped onto the set, the studio quieted instinctively. He moved with that same slow, deliberate pace that made him a cinematic icon. His presence, as commanding as ever. He nodded to the crew, took his seat across from Stephanopoulos, and adjusted his jacket like he was settling into a gunfight. "Good morning, Clint," Stephanopoulos said, flashing his polished anchor smile. "Morning," Clint replied, low and gravelly, his expression unreadable. The first few minutes went smoothly. Clint talked about the film, its themes, the cast, what drew him to the project. It was the kind of calm, nostalgic segment morning shows love, but then, without warning, Stephanopoulos shifted gears. "Clint, you've seen Hollywood evolve dramatically. Some say it's become more socially conscious, more inclusive. What's your take on that shift?" Eastwood's eyes narrowed barely, but it was enough. This wasn't what he'd agreed to. "Well, George," he said slowly, "good stories are good stories, no matter who tells them. I've always believed in hiring the best person for the job." Stephanopoulos nodded, but didn't let up. "But surely you recognize the industry had to change, right?" There were deep, systemic issues, barriers that needed to be torn down. A beat, the studio lights seemed colder. Eastwood sat back slightly, jaw tightening. "What I recognize," he said, "is that politics and agendas have a way of clouding storytelling. Movies should be about truth, not boxes to check." The audience, unsure whether to clap or stay silent, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Stephanopoulos pushed harder. Isn't ignoring those issues also political? Isn't pretending representation doesn't matter its own kind of statement? "I'm not pretending anything," Clint said, his voice low but firm. "I'm saying if you stop telling stories and start running public service announcements, you lose the soul of the art." Tension now crackled through the studio. The camera operators exchanged glances. The control room hesitated should they cut to commercial. Stephanopoulos wasn't done. But some would argue that's a privileged view. You've never had to fight for representation. And that was it. Clint leaned forward, eyes locked. Privilege. I grew up in the Great Depression, dug pools, worked steel mills. Nobody handed me anything. I didn't get in this business because of who I was. I survived it because I worked harder than everyone else around me. But the industry wasn't equal. Stephanopoulos tried again. The industry was brutal. Clint cut in. 4. Everyone, you think I walked into studios and got roles because I looked the part? I got turned down more times than I can count. I just didn't quit. Now, the tension was undeniable. The control room director hovered over the button to break away, but no one moved. "So you don't think there were barriers?" Stephanopoulos asked. "There are always barriers," Eastwood said. "Life has them. You can either complain about them or push through. But don't tell me storytelling is supposed to be therapy. It's supposed to be real." A long pause. "I think you're missing the bigger picture," Stephanopoulos offered, clearly flustered. And I think you're missing what made movies matter in the first place. Eastwood replied, deadly calm. They didn't try to fix the world. They just told the truth and let people feel something real. By now, the temperature in the studio was ice cold. No one moved. No one spoke. This was supposed to be a routine interview. Instead, it became something else entirely, a flashpoint, a showdown. A viral moment that would be dissected, praised, condemned and remembered. Asterisk, Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down. If anything, Clint's calm was feeding something in him like he smelled blood in the water. Each of Eastwood's measured replies only seemed to push George further, as if the legendary actor's refusal to rise to the bait was its own kind of arrogance. But Clint, George said, leaning in, his voice tighter now, surely you can admit. Your generation of filmmakers had certain ... advantages. The old boy network, the exclusionary practices. Clint's jaw set. His eyes narrowed. My generation, he said. The word slow and deliberate. You mean the one that fought in World War II? The one that built the damn country you now sit in, asking smug questions from a leather chair? There was a pause, and then, no, Stephanopoulos shot back. I mean the generation that dominated Hollywood while keeping women and minorities locked out. That one. The studio went still. Even the lighting techs froze. This wasn't TV anymore. This was something raw. Clint leaned back slightly, his silhouette suddenly eerily reminiscent of those westerns where the hero just discovered who betrayed the town. George, he said quietly, you've got me confused with somebody else. I never kept anyone out. Never gave a damn about color or creed. You could hold a camera and tell the truth. You got the job. Period. That's easy to say now, George replied, sitting up straighter. But the record speaks for itself. How many of your films had diverse casts? How many women directors did you fight for? Clint gripped the armrests. You want to talk about the record? T leaned in. I made films about what matters men. On the edge, people under pressure, real Americans in real pain. I wasn't playing identity bingo. I was telling the damn truth. So diversity wasn't a priority for you? No, Clint replied, voice rising for the first time. Story was the priority. Always has been. Stephanopoulos didn't miss a beat. But the stories you chose to tell came from one very specific worldview. That did it. The granite cracked. My worldview, Clint repeated, his voice hardening. You mean the belief that people should work hard, own up to their mistakes, and treat others with respect? That's your problem with me? George cut in, pressing. The perspective of white, male, conservative America. Clint stood up. The chair screeched backward across the studio floor like a warning shot. The tension snapped taut. You think? Unforgiven was conservative, he growled. You think $1 Million Baby was some flag-waving fantasy? George looked up at him, still seated, but now visibly rattled. Those are exceptions. I'm talking about your overall body of work, your message? Clint's voice dropped an octave. You don't know a damn thing about my message. What I've shown in my films is America, not the sanitized version. The one with scars, with grit, with pain. That's the truth. You can't handle that, so you call it bias. George tried to pivot. But don't you think some of your movies promote outdated ideas of masculinity? That violence solves problems. Stereotypes. Clint repeated, his face now inches from George's. How about this one? That anyone who doesn't parrot your politics must be some racist, sexist, backwards redneck. You want to slap a label on me so you don't have to listen. I'm asking fair questions, George said, quieter now, but trying to stay composed. No, Clint said, deadly calm. You're setting a trap. You brought me on here to talk about my new film, and instead, you're putting me on trial for being Clint Eastwood. In the control room, producers were whispering, signaling, praying someone would cut to commercial. "You think this is journalism?" Clint continued, his voice shaking the air. "This is theater. You're looking for a soundbite to feed your followers. Well, I've got one for you. I've spent my life making movies that meant something. Not chasing trends, not playing politics. You want a moment? Fine. Here's your moment." George tried to pull it back. "You're being overly sensitive." "Sensitive?" Clint laughed, a cold bark of a sound. "Kid, I've been called every name in the book by critics who actually knew what the hell they were talking about. But you're sitting there, smug behind a desk, thinking you're doing the world a service by grilling an 80-year-old about diversity quotas." "That's not fair," George said, shifting in his seat. "No, what's not fair is pretending to care about cinema when all you want is content." Clint pointed to the camera. "You want me to apologize for making the kind of films people still remember? Not happening. I didn't come here to play your game, and I'm not going to help you sell your clip to Twitter." The air was sharp as glass. No one breathed. "You invited me here," Clint said finally, eyes locked on George. "Next time, be honest about what you're after." And with that, Clint walked off set. The camera followed him for a moment, then cut to black. The equipment was live, ready to cut at any moment. "I think you're misunderstanding my intentions," Stephanopoulos said, his voice thin. "Your intentions are perfectly clear," Eastwood replied coolly. "You brought me on this show hoping I'd play the villain in your little morality play." Well, he leaned in slightly. "Congratulations, George. You got your confrontation. Hope it was worth it." Stephanopoulos flinched, but pride stiffened his spine. If anything, Eastwood's directness had ignited something in him defensive, even petulant. "You know what, Clint?" he said, his professional mask slipping. "Maybe the real issue is you can't handle questions about your legacy. Maybe you're just not used to someone pushing back against your outdated views." The words dropped like a challenge, tossed in the dust of an old Western. Eastwood stared at him, unmoved. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, razor sharp. "Outdated views," he echoed. "Son, let me tell you something. I believe in treating people with dignity no matter who they are. I believe respect is earned through action, not handed out because you tick a box. I believe in telling stories that mean something to real people. If that makes me outdated, then hell, I'll wear the badge proudly. But the world has moved beyond the simple moral codes your films rely on," Stephanopoulos pushed. "Audiences today expect more nuance, more complexity." Eastwood gave a short, bitter laugh. "Complexity? You want to lecture me on complexity? I made a film about a racist war veteran who learns to look past his hate. I told the story of a female boxer fighting a world that dismissed her. I've made films about grief, vengeance, justice, about the cost of violence and the price of redemption, but none of that matters to you, does it? Because I didn't hit the right political notes." "Those themes were secondary," Stephanopoulos insisted. "Your films still center a kind of masculine heroism that many find problematic today." "Problematic," Eastwood said, shaking his head. "There's that bloody word again. Problematic to people like you. Standing up for what's right. Problematic, taking responsibility. Problematic, protecting the ones you love. Apparently, problematic too." The studio had gone silent. The only sound was the faint hum of cameras still rolling. Even the producers had stopped giving cues. "I'm not saying those values are wrong," Stephanopoulos offered, though his tone betrayed him. "I'm saying the way your films frame them tends to shut out other voices. Other voices." Eastwood's voice rose. "George, I've worked with actors from every walk of life. I've told stories from all corners. But I didn't shout about it on red carpets or slap diversity labels on every poster. I did the work. But no, because I didn't virtue signal, You think it doesn't count. Oh, but you must see how your influence shaped Hollywood in ways that weren't always positive, Stephanopoulos pressed. That did it. Eastwood's composure, legendary for its calm, cracked. He stood, fury rippling through his voice. My influence? He thundered. You want to talk about my influence? I helped build an entire genre. I proved you could make films that were both commercial and meaningful. I told stories about people facing real moral choices and, yes, I made money because that's the business we're in. Stephanopoulos opened his mouth to interject. But Eastwood wasn't done. I've employed thousands of actors, writers, directors, set crews, carpenters, makeup artists. I gave opportunities to people based on talent and grit, not checklists. I built careers. I built a legacy. And you, he jabbed a finger toward the host. You sit behind a desk, pontificating about justice and representation, but you've never risked your own money to tell a story. You've never stared down a production falling apart. You've never fought for a scene or bled for a script. So don't tell me about impact. Don't tell me about what matters. Silence. Even the crew stood still. Clint Eastwood took one final breath, then turned and walked off set, leaving Stephanopoulos sitting frozen under the studio lights, no longer the interrogator, but the one being watched. Asterisk, take a chance on your vision, Eastwood said flatly. You've never had to look a crew member in the eye and tell them that movie's dead and they're out of work. The host shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his pride refused to let him back down. That's the problem, Clint. Stephanopoulos pushed back. Hollywood's been stuck in neutral because people like you keep prioritizing profits over principles. Eastwood narrowed his eyes, stunned at the arrogance. Profits over principles. He leaned forward. George, without profit, there are no films, no crew, no scripts, no stories. You can have all the principles in the world, but if nobody wants to watch what you're making, then you're not changing the world, you're just talking to yourself. But surely art should be more than just commercial appeal. Stephanopoulos argued, almost pleading. Eastwood's voice dropped to a low, biting drawl. Art? You want to lecture me about art? He shook his head slowly. I've been making films. Longer than you've been breathing. Real films. Art that connects. Not the kind of self-indulgent garbage that wins shiny trophies, but puts people to sleep. The tension in the studio was boiling. Eastwood stood, and the atmosphere shifted. His presence towered over Stephanopoulos, who now seemed small, fragile, dwarfed by a legend. Look, Stephanopoulos tried again, his voice cracking slightly. We're getting off track. I just wanted an honest conversation about your career and its impact. Eastwood laughed a dry, cutting sound. Honest. There's nothing honest about this setup. Tia, you dragged me on here under false pretenses. And when I wouldn't dance to your tune, you started swinging. That's not journalism, George. That's activism hiding behind a teleprompter. I resent that, the host said stiffly, his voice tightening. You can resent it all you want. Doesn't make it less true. Eastwood's gaze was ice cold now. You came in with your mind made up. All you wanted was a clip to post on Twitter. You weren't interested in hearing me, you were just waiting to be proven right. Silence gripped the studio. Crew members stood frozen, watching history unfold. You're being unfair, Stephanopoulos muttered, but even he didn't believe it. Eastwood tilted his head. Unfair? You know what's unfair, George? Inviting someone here to promote their work, then ambushing them to score points. You used your platform not to ask questions, but to push an agenda. And now, I'm done. He reached down, calmly unhooking his mic with the steadiness of a man who had done this before. Wait, Stephanopoulos blurted, panic in his voice. We're not finished. Eastwood met his eyes, final and cold. Oh, we're finished. I didn't come here to be disrespected. I came to talk about movies, about stories, about the work. Instead, I got lectured by someone who thinks a media job makes him smarter than 50 years of experience. He dropped the microphone onto the chair beside him. It landed with a sharp thud that echoed like a gunshot through the studio. Then he turned to the camera. "Folks," he said, his voice steady, weighty with gravitas, "I came here to talk about storytelling, about why we make movies in the first place to move people. Instead, I was told that doesn't matter unless I check the right political boxes. If that's where we're headed, then maybe I really have made my last film." Stephanopoulos tried to jump in, but Eastwood silenced him with nothing more than a glance cool, withering, legendary. "I've spent my whole life trying to tell stories that mattered to real people. If that's not enough anymore, well, that's not my problem." And with that, Clint Eastwood, 94 years old, unbent, unbroken, turned and walked off the set. Not a single word, not a single glance back. His footsteps echoed through the stunned silence, growing fainter with every step, until all that remained was the image of an empty chair and a crumbling legacy sitting behind a desk. Stephanopoulos sat, alone, red-faced, shaken. The cameras were still rolling. But the moment his moment was gone. Around him, the crew stood stiff, stunned. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was on the man who had just been outclassed by an old cowboy with nothing left to prove. And in the aftermath, one thing was painfully clear. In trying to corner a Hollywood legend, George Stephanopoulos had only succeeded in dismantling himself.